All right, shalom, shalom. I'm going to start off this video by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakaha Kwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elder bishops, a great millstone that rule well, that teach well while learning the truth 100% according to the Bible. Also want to say shalom to the elect, the 144,000 men prophet service scattered abroad the four corners of the earth, and shalom to you, Akwaf, which are you sisters that are sincere in your children, shalom. And in today's video, as you can see, is going to be titled The Love of Many Shall Wax Cold. And it's basically going to be building off of this this situation that occurred where you basically had this father, deleted his own son, and things like that. So, I'm going to basically be building off of this video, but before I even get into it, I want to get a precept, and this is 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, and I'm going to read on down. It said, "This know also that in the last days, right, perilous times shall come," right? Verse 2, "For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful and unholy," right? Verse 3, it said, "Without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good." But I want to focus on at the top where it says without natural affection. You see? And I actually typed that in on the AI overview on Google. And what popped up was without natural affection means a lack of instinctive love and care, particularly within a family and specifically towards one's own relatives, right? So that's what the Lord was basically saying was going to be taking place in these latter days, that you were going to have a lot of, family members basically, doing these type of things to one another, and we know ultimately this is the spirit that Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shah is ultimately bringing to the earth, man. That division, that severance of, mother and daughter and things of that nature. And I'm actually get that precept. This is Matthew chapter 10, and I'm going to start at verse 34. It says, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword," right? Talking about that division. Verse 35, "For I'm come to set a man at variance," right? Meaning at odds against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, right? Verse 36, "And a man's foes," meaning his enemies, "shall be they of his own household," right? And we see the Lord ultimately has that spirit in the earth as of this moment, man. That's why every time you look on the news or things of that nature, you always see situations occurring like this. And it's always the family member or someone that's close that's ultimately doing these things. But you're seeing these things happen more now in this time. Because like I said, we're in the end, as I just read in 2 Timothy chapter 3, that in the last days, these things shall come, right? And we're seeing a lot of these things ultimately happening in the earth because we're at the end, man. We're at the end of this society, So situations like this are ultimately only going to continue to escalate and occur here in these times, So I'm actually getting to this video so we can see what it is that they're basically talking about, But like I said, this is the time and season that we're in. And we know the Lord is only going to allow these type of evils to only increase, in this world, man, This is actually, I'm going to get that precept, then I'm going to play the video. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 14. And I'm going to start right at the point. I'm going to get to verse 16, right? It says, "For yet," right, "greater evils," meaning bad times, "than those which thou hast seen happen shall be done hereafter." Verse 17, "For look how much the world shall be weakened through age, so much the more shall evils," right, meaning bad times, "increase upon them that dwell therein." And we know this is ultimately talking about events happening as far as like plagues, all type of different other forms of judgment that the Lord ultimately brings forth. But we know that all of these things like this that are happening are judgments as well, man. It tells you that in Zephaniah 3 and 5, right? And I'm going to actually get that too. It says, "The just Lord, Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shah, is in the midst thereof. He will not do iniquity. Every morning doth he bring his judgment to light. He faileth not, but the unjust knoweth no shame." You see, so even when situations like this occur where you have, so-called family members ultimately doing things of this nature to one of their own family members or etc., you just having, any type of violence taking place where someone ultimately loses their life. We know that all of those are judgments from the Lord, man. And we know the Lord controls these things. And I'm actually getting this precept that I got right here. This is Psalms chapter 78, verse 49. It said, "He," right, talking about the Heavenly Father, "cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, his wrath and indignation and trouble by sending evil angels among them," man. And we know that those spirits that are created for vengeance, they ultimately come in the form of all things. Men, women, whatever the case may be. The Lord can put a spirit upon someone, to do his bidding, right? Which is to bring forth judgment. And this is that time of season where we're living in, man. And all of these people out here, they're just bugged out, and just all over the place, man. These people are not spiritually grounded. So they're just, susceptible to all of these different spirits, man, that are ultimately jumping on these people that are making them do these horrific acts, man. But like I said, again, it all goes back to the Lord, because he's the one that's controlling these things, and this is how he's bringing forth his judgment upon these people, man, in these times that we're in, and I'm actually go to a precept just on that as well. This is Isaiah chapter 45, and I'm going to start at verse 7. It says, I form the light, right, and create darkness. I make peace and create evil, right? I, the Lord, Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, do all these things, man. So the Lord is the one that's controlling all of these things. He's controlling the minds of these people, man. No one can do anything unless the Lord allows them to do it, man. It tells you that in Proverbs 19:21. There be many devices in a man's heart, right? Meaning his mind, nevertheless, the counsel of the Lord that shall stand. So this was ultimately the Lord counsel, to bring forth this judgment, man. So I'm going to get into this video as of now. But before I start, I want to say fair use. Fair use under 1976 Copyright Act. I'm not getting paid for this video. Just only for educational purposes only. Fair use.
We want to go to our top stories back here at home. The father of a 16-year-old boy whose body was found in a landfill last week, now charged with second-degree murder. Jordan Collins Sr. appeared in an Anoka County courtroom this morning for a bail hearing. Fox 9's Karen Scullin has been following this story and joins us from our newsroom with the latest. Karen.
Well, this case really just keeps getting worse, from Manny Collins' disappearance to his father's alleged involvement to homicide and decapitation. Jordan Collins Sr. is a 38-year-old father accused of the heinous murder of his own 16-year-old son, Manny. Manny was staying with his dad in his Columbia Heights apartment and was last seen and heard from on May the 8th. According to court documents, during Manny's disappearance, investigators searched that apartment and found items with apparent blood staining in garbage bags, several butcher hunting-style knives in the apartment's bedroom closet. A piece of the mattress covering was missing on the underside of the mattress, and a piece of carpet and carpet padding was also missing. After the search, Collins Sr. stopped communicating with law enforcement. Following that, a video led investigators to search the Elk River landfill for a month until they finally found the remains of Manny. On Monday, July 7th, Collins Sr. was seen withdrawing money from a bank. He was later arrested at the Alamon Community Center. As the investigation revealed, he was planning to leave the state. Collins Sr. told investigators he cut the carpet and mattress to clean up his own blood, and that the knives were used to butcher goats and sheep. But only Manny's blood was found inside that apartment. An autopsy indicated evidence of decapitation by knife, and the manner of death was ruled
Right. So you saw what happened, Basically, the guy's dad was the one responsible for his demise, and ultimately he decapitated him, man. So like I said, we're just living in these times, man. This is Sirach chapter 39, verse 28. There be spirits that are created for vengeance, which in their fury lay on sore strokes, and the time of destruction they pour out their force, and appease the wrath of him that made them, man. So like I said, you got a lot of these people that are like this guy that are out here and they're active, man. And we also know that the Lord said in these times that, people will be like this. This is St. Matthew chapter 24, verse 12. And because iniquity, right, meaning sin upon sin, shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And when you go into that word cold in the Greek, it means psychos. So, you got a lot of people out here that are losing their minds, bugging out, plagued with all type of demons. And, they're just out here doing all types of things, man. So, this is why it's important for us, brothers and sisters of the hopeful elect, to constantly stay in the spirit, always to be praying as the Lord have required of us to do, It tells you that in 1 Thessalonians 5:17, to pray without ceasing. Speaking to myself first and foremost, we got to constantly be in the spirit of praying, and praying to the Lord just to keep us safe, in our day-to-day affairs, when we're out here walking around in this world amongst these people that are not right. We just got to constantly, pray that the Lord has his mercy upon us, man. Because like I said, we're living in some very deadly, serious times. And like I said, we're living in a time where you can't really trust anybody. you know, especially if they're not in this truth and they're not grounded in the spirit and they're not in the right mind state. You know, these people are all, you know, possible people that can be used by Satan, man. You know, if they're not grounded in the spirit and they're not right, you know. So like I said, I'm going to get just a few scriptures, man, on wisdom, because that's ultimately what we got to be moving in these times, brothers and sisters, in that spirit of being wise. You know, this is Ephesians chapter 5, and I'm going to start at verse 15. KJV, it says, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, right? So you got to be circumspect. You got to be aware of your surroundings. You got to be aware of the places in which it is that you go into. You got to be aware of who you have around you, you know, especially in these times and seasons, because we see just how crazy things really are, you know, especially like I said, if they're not in the truth like you are, they're not grounded in the spirit. You know, these people are not moving right. I mean, you don't want to be around people in these times that are not, you know, spiritually there, man. You want to surround yourself around people that are like-minded, just like you in the spirit, you know. And it says, I'm gonna read it again. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, right? So you got to be wise, you know, in how you know, live your life, you know, the places that you go, you know, being observant of your surroundings, you know, not just being foolishly, you know, out here walking around, just not paying attention like most people are, you know, but we got to be in the spirit of being circumspect, which is paying attention to our surroundings and the things that are ultimately amongst us, right? And this is why, verse 16, redeeming the time, because the day is an evil, man. Like I said, we're living in very evil times, man. And these people out here, they're not right in the spirit, man. You know, so you just want to be wise. So ultimately, you know, you can you know, wisdom will keep you from certain situations. You know, wisdom will allow you to think before you react, think before you do something, think before you ultimately answer something. You know, you just want to allow wisdom to meet you at every thought, man, especially in these days, right? Because as it says in this precept right here, I'm going to get that. This is Colossians chapter 4, right? And I'm going to start at verse 5. It says, walk in wisdom towards them that are without, right? And that's what we got to do constantly, day in and day out. We got to walk with wisdom towards the people of this world who we know does not have wisdom, right? Because they're walking in the ways of the flesh. You know, these people are not right spiritually, so they have no idea what time of season that we're in. And they don't know that a lot of these people out here are possessed by demonic spirits, man, that are out here doing all of this wickedness. These people don't know that. So us knowing that, us brothers and sisters of the hopeful elect, we got to walk in the spirit of being wise, knowing that we're amongst these people that do not have wisdom within them, man. You know, these people are just empty vessels, man, walking around just, you know, flesh, man, you know, meat suits. You know, ultimately that can be body snatched by any of these demonic forces to, you know, ultimately to commit any type of heinous or, you know, vile act, man, you know. And we knowing that, we got to move with wisdom, right? And this is verse 5 again, walk in wisdom towards them that are without, redeeming the time, right? Verse 6. It said, let your speech be always with grace, right? Seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. And that's ultimately the spirit we got to be in. You know, we got to ultimately, you know, be checking ourselves first and foremost, you know, making sure we're moving right in the spirit, you know, because, hey, it's so easy to get caught up in any type of situation, you know, especially when you're not moving in the spirit of wisdom. You know, it's easy to get caught up. It's easy to get into a situation that you don't ultimately have to be in. You know, but that's why you want to allow that wisdom to guide you, man. Right. And that's what Lord Yahushua said. This is St. Matthew chapter 10. I'm going to start at verse 16 in the KJV. And it says, right, this is Lord Yahushua speaking. It said, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. And that's what we are as the believers. You know, we're sheep, which are docile, harmless animals. And we're in the midst of wolves, man. You know, wolves are ravenous, you know, vicious, ferocious, you know, diabolical creatures, man. And that's who we're surrounded by in this world, these people. That's what they are, you know, especially those that are not walking in this light like we are. They're wolves, man. So we got to be wise walking amongst these people, man, knowing that they're evil, knowing that they're wicked, knowing that these people ultimately don't have our best interests or our best intentions. You know, we got to be circumspect, man. Right. It says, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Right. And that's the spirit that we got to ultimately be in these times, man. Because like I said, things out here are crazy, man. And people are getting worse and worse as time goes on. People are not going to get more better. These people are going to get more unhinged, more violent and more demonic, man, as time moves on. So we ultimately got to pray to the Lord to keep his spirit upon us, that we can continue to, just be moving around in a circumspect state of mind, because that's what we need to be in these times, man, and I'm going to actually go to a precept on that. This is 1 Peter chapter 4, and I'm going to start at verse 7 in the KJV, right? It says, but the end of all things is at hand, right? And we can see we're at the end through all of the various things in which it is that are happening in the earth. Like I just read in 2 Timothy chapter 3 earlier, right? About in the last days how perilous times shall come. And I read all of the descriptions of how the people ultimately would be behaving in the latter times, which the time we're in. And we can see that amongst all these people out here, man, that they're just through, they're finished. So we know the end of all things is here, man. We see it through the behavior of these people, and also all of the prophecies that the Lord are allowing to manifest in this time, right? So it says, but the end of all things is at hand. Be ye therefore sober and watch unto prayer. And that's the spirit we got to constantly be in, being circumspect. Because when you're watching, you're being circumspect. You're being in the spirit of wisdom. You're allowing, not just anything to occur around you and you're not on top of it, That's dealing with events that are happening in the world. That's ultimately dealing with how you move in your day-to-day life. You just want to always be in a, sober state of mind, being wise, vigilant, And I'm actually look up that word vigilant, right? Through the spirit. This is the definition of the word vigilant on the AI overview on Google. It says vigilant means being watchful, alert, and attentive, especially in spiritual matters, right? Because we ultimately know we're in a spiritual warfare. We're not wrestling against flesh and blood, as it tells you in Ephesians 6:12. So we got to constantly be in that spirit of being circumspect, brothers. And you few sisters out there, right? Because this is the reason why. This is 1 Peter chapter 5. And I'm going to start at verse 8. It says, be sober, be vigilant, right? Because your adversary, the devil, right? Which is talking about Esau eating the so-called white man, which is the physical counterpart of the spiritual demon Satan. And also this is talking about the spiritual demon Satan as well on the left-hand side. Because like I said, we know that he's ultimately operating through a lot of these people, man. These evil spirits. That are doing the bidding of the Lord. Ultimately, that's who they're doing the bidding of. But still, we want to, be in the spirit of wisdom, So ultimately that, we can avoid certain situations like this occurring or, just avoid certain things that we ultimately don't want to put ourselves in, because ultimately when you're walking in the spirit of wisdom, the Lord can alert you of certain situations before it actually occurs and can, remove you from certain things, man. Out of moving in that spirit of being circumspect. So that's what we want to constantly have our mind in, and being focused upon. Right. So it says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Right. And that's ultimately why we got to be in that spirit of always watching, always being vigilant and always being, just, wise, brothers and sisters, no better way to put it. But like I said, the reason we want to be in that spirit, because like I said, the days are evil, man. We see what's happening out here in this world. We see things are not getting better. Things are only getting worse. So we got to continue to be in that spirit of watching, man, as well as praying, constantly praying, first and foremost, But yeah, that's pretty much everything I had to say with today's video. Lord's willing, I pray it be edifying. Just a little quick video, like I said, about us ultimately, moving in the spirit of being wise, praying to the Lord for wisdom if you like it. But you definitely want to be in that spirit of, just thinking before you do certain things or thinking before you even, you just got to think about everything, and I'm not saying like overthink or overanalyze things, because we know we got to trust in the Lord. But still, just before we ultimately do certain things or do whatever the case may be, whether you go outside, whatever it may be, you just want to always allow that wisdom to guide you. So, yeah, that's pretty much everything. Till the next time, I'm going to say shalom.